On a radiant morning along Rodeo Drive, Aisha Thompson, a poised black woman, steps into the opulent Lux Emporium, her navy tracksuit, a quiet rebellion against extravagance. Seeking a rare fountain pen for her husband's anniversary, she's met with icy disdain from a saleswoman who sneers at her skin and attire, assuming poverty is where wealth resides. The sting of prejudice cuts deep, but Aisha's dignity holds firm. Little does the staff know that her husband David wields power that could shake their world. What unfolds when assumptions clash with truth? Stick around to uncover a story of justice and grace that'll leave you inspired if this sparks your curiosity. Subscribe to our channel for the latest tales of triumph and drop a comment sharing where you're watching. How far will Aisha's strength carry her? And what lesson awaits the boutique you'll want? To hear every moment of this powerful journey, the sun hung low over Los Angeles, casting a golden sheen across Rodeo Drive that made the sidewalks gleam like polished marble. Palm trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, their fronds whispering secrets to the boutiques below where wealth and ambition collided in a symphony of desire. It was 10:15 a.m., and the street pulsed with quiet anticipation. Shoppers in designer heels clicked past their bags, swinging like trophies, while chauffeurs idled in sleek cars awaiting their next command. Amid this orchestrated opulence, Aisha Thompson stepped forward, a solitary figure whose presence seemed to defy the street's unwritten code. At 4'2", Aisha carried herself with a grace that needed no adornment. Her navy tracksuit hugged her frame comfortably, its simplicity a stark contrast to the glittering facades around her. Braided hair pulled into a neat bun caught the sunlight, each strand a testament to her meticulous care. She wore no makeup, her warm brown skin glowing under the California sky, and her sneakers, practical, unpretentious, trod lightly on the pavement. To the untrained eye, she might have blended into the background. But Aisha was no stranger to this world, married for 12 years to David Thompson, a tech mogul whose empire reshaped industries. She had access to wealth most could only dream. Yet Aisha chose authenticity over ostentation, finding joy in life's quieter moments, a comment.com choice that often puzzled those who equated value with display today. Though her heart thrummed with purpose, their anniversary was approaching, and Aisha had set her sights on a gift that would speak to David's soul. A rare 1,952nd fountain pen, one of only 10 ever crafted, housed at Lux Emporium. She'd spent weeks researching its history. Its ebony barrel engraved with delicate vines had once belonged to a poet whose words moved nations. David, with his love for craftsmanship and stories etched in time, would cherish it. The thought brought a soft smile to her lips. As she navigated the street, her steps deliberate but unhurried. This wasn't about spending money. It was about giving meaning, gesture to honor the man who stood by her through every storm. As she approached Lux Emporium, the boutique loomed like a temple of exclusivity. Its glass facade sparkled, reflecting the morning light in dazzling arcs, while the name etched in gold cursive promised treasures few could claim through the windows. Aisha glimpsed crystal chandeliers casting prisms across marble floors, their glow illuminating display cases that cradled jewels and artifacts like sacred relics. Well-dressed patrons glided inside, their laughter muffled but confident, as if they belonged to a secret society. Aisha paused, her hand hovering over the door's gilded handle. She checked her watch. 10:15 a.m. David would meet her at noon for lunch, leaving her plenty of time to secure the pen and have it wrapped, preserving the surprise. Yet a flicker of unease stirred within her, a premonition she couldn't quite. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy glass door. A soft chime announced her arrival, its tone delicate but piercing like a warning bell in a silent hall. The air inside was cool, laced with the musky scent of perfume that clung to the senses. Aisha's sneakers squeaked faintly on the polished floor, a sound that felt louder than it was in the hushed reverence of the space. The staff, impeccably dressed in black blazers and crisp shirts, moved with choreographed precision, their eyes scanning customers with practiced scrutiny. None met Aisha's gaze. A woman adjusted a diamond necklace for a client. Her smile, radiant but exclusive. A man polished a glass case. That his focus absolute. Aisha felt the weight of their indifference, a subtle dismissal that pricked at her skin. She moved toward a display case near the center of the store, her eyes locking onto the fountain pen. There it was, nestled on a velvet cushion, its ebony surface gleaming under the spotlight. The engravings caught the light, vines curling like whispers of history, and Aisha's heart quickened. It was perfect, more than an object. It was a story, piece of art that would resonate with David's quiet passion. She leaned closer, her reflection ghosting across the glass, and imagined his face when he saw it, the way his eyes would soften, the way he'd traced the engravings with reverence. For a moment, the world narrowed to that pen, and the boutique's chill faded, but the moment shattered. "Excuse me, can I help you?" The voice was sharp, slicing through Aisha's reverie like a blade. She turned to face a saleswoman. Claire, according to the name tag pinned to her blazer, Claire's blonde ponytail was pulled tight, her face a mask of politeness that didn't reach her eyes, those eyes pale and unyielding, swept over Aisha's tracksuit, lingered on her braids, and settled on her skin with a flicker of disdain. Aisha recognized that look. She'd seen it in boardrooms, at galas, in fleeting glances that assumed she was less. Before she spoke, her stomach tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, I'd like to see that fountain pen," she said, pointing to the case. Claire's lips pursed a micro-expression of doubt that spoke volumes. "That one?" she asked, her tone heavy with implication. "It's a very exclusive piece." The word exclusive landed like a barrier, a challenge Aisha had faced too. Often she nodded, holding Claire's gaze. "I'm aware. I'd like to see it, please." Claire hesitated, her fingers twitching, as if debating whether to comply. Around them, the store hummed with subtle activity. Customers browsing, staff whispering, but Aisha felt eyes on her. A spotlight. She hadn't sought a man in a tailored suit, glanced over his curiosity. Tinged with judgment, a woman clutching a designer purse paused, her stare lingering too long. Claire sighed a sound, so faint it might have gone unnoticed. But Aisha caught it, a signal of annoyance, of disbelief that this woman, dressed so plainly, dared to ask for something so grand with exaggerated care. Claire retrieved a key from her pocket, her movements slow, deliberate, as if hoping Aisha would reconsider and leave. The lock clicked, and the case opened, releasing a faint scent of polished wood. Claire lifted the pen, placing it on a velvet tray with the caution one might use for a fragile relic. She slid it toward Aisha, but kept her hand close, as if guarding against theft. "This is one of only 10 ever made," she said. Her voice clipped her eyes, suggesting Aisha couldn't possibly understand its worth. Aisha's fingers hovered over the pen, not yet touching it. She studied the engravings, the way they danced in the light, and felt a surge of certainty. This was the gift, the one that would carry her love across the years. But Claire's stare burned into her, and the air grew heavier, charged with unspoken assumptions across the store. Another figure stirred, a man in a tailored suit, his posture authoritative, his eyes narrowing as he watched the exchange. Aisha didn't see him yet, but she felt the shift, the way the room tilted toward judgment. Her heart sank, not from fear, but from the weary recognition of what was coming. This was no ordinary shopping trip. It was a gauntlet, and she'd only just begun to run it. The air in Lux Emporium hung thick with the scent of But to Aisha Thompson, it felt more like a storm brewing, silent, heavy, and ready to break. She stood before the display case, the rare fountain pen gleaming on its velvet tray, its ebony barrel etched with vines that seemed to pulse with history. Her heart had settled on it. Perfect anniversary gift for David. But the saleswoman's voice had already pierced the moment like a needle. Claire's words, "This is one of only 10 ever made," carried a venom veiled as fact. Her pale eyes raking over Aisha's navy tracksuit and brown skin with a judgment that needed no translation. Aisha's fingers hovered above the pen, her breath steady. Despite the prickle of unease creeping up her spine, she'd faced this before, those looks, those pauses. But today she'd come for love, not a fight. "I'd like to examine it closer," Aisha said, her voice calm but firm. Each word, a deliberate step across the invisible line. Claire had drawn the saleswoman's lips, twitched a fleeting smirk that vanished. As quickly as it appeared, of course. Claire replied, but her tone suggested anything but agreement. She nudged the tray an inch closer, hand lingering as if Aisha might lunge for the $45. 000. Treasure and bolt the gesture was subtle and practiced, but to Aisha it screamed distrust, a distrust rooted not in her actions, but in the color of her skin and the simplicity of her clothes. She met Claire's gaze unflinching and saw the challenge there. "Prove you belong." Aisha reached for the pen, her fingers brushing the cool metal with reverence. It was lighter than she'd expected, its balance perfect, the engravings catching, the chandelier's light and delicate glints. She turned it slowly, imagining David's calloused hands holding at his eyes, tracing the same vines as he smiled, that quiet smile she loved. For a moment the store faded, the whispers, the glares, the weight of being watched. It was just her and the pen, a bridge to her husband's heart. "It's beautiful," she murmured, more to herself than to Claire. The saleswoman's eyebrow arched a silent question. "Beautiful to you? It's a very exclusive piece," Claire repeated, leaning forward slightly, her voice now laced with a patronizing sweetness. "Not many can appreciate its significance." The words landed like a slap, their implication clear. Aisha, in her tracksuit and braids, wasn't one of the chosen few. Aisha's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral, years of navigating such slights having honed her composure. "I appreciate it just fine," she said, setting the pen back on the tray with care. "I'll take it." The statement hung in the air, bold and unyielding, like a flag planted in hostile territory. Claire blinked, her facade cracking for a split second before she recovered. "You'll take it," she echoed, her tone teetering between disbelief and mockery. "This is a $45. Ling pen, perhaps you'd like to discuss payment options." The suggestion was a trap designed to expose Aisha as an imposter, someone playing at wealth she couldn't possibly possess. Aisha's pulse quickened not from doubt. She'd handled transactions 10 times this size, but from the sting of being reduced to a stereotype. "That won't be necessary," she replied, her voice steady as steel. "I'll pay in full." Claire's eyes narrowed, searching Aisha's face for a bluff, finding none. She straightened her fingers, tapping the counter as if summoning patience. "Well," she said, drawing out the word, "we'd need to verify certain details for a purchase of this magnitude." The emphasis on verification was deliberate, a coded way of saying Aisha didn't look the part. Around them, the store's hum grew louder. A woman in a fur stole glanced over her curiosity. Undisguised, the man, adjusting his cufflinks, paused, his stare lingering. Aisha felt their eyes like pinpricks, each one amplifying the tension coiling in her chest. From across the room, another figure stirred. Edward Langston, the manager, had been watching from the moment Aisha entered his tailored suit and slicked back hair. A deliberate contrast to her casual attire, he prided himself on reading wealth at a glance, and in his ledger, Aisha was a blank page. An anomaly who didn't belong among Lux Emporium's elite. Now, as Claire's voice carried, he glided toward them, his polished loafers silent on the marble floor. His presence shifted the air like a predator, circling prey, and Aisha sensed it before she saw him. She kept her focus on the pen, refusing to shrink under the growing scrutiny. Is there an issue here? Claire Edwards' voice was smooth, almost musical, but it carried an edge that made Aisha's skin prickle. He stopped beside the counter, his hands clasped behind his back. His smile, a polished mask that didn't reach his eyes. Claire turned to him, relief flickering across her face. "This customer," she said, the word dripping with skepticism, "is interested in the Montclair pen." She gestured to Aisha, her tone implying the absurdity of the request. Edward's gaze settled on Aisha, slow and deliberate, taking in her tracksuit, her braids, and her lack of jewelry. His smile tightened. A silent verdict rendered. "I see," Edward said, his voice now tinged with a condescension that matched Claire's. "Madam, that pen is one of our most exclusive items. We cater to a very specific clientele." The word specific landed heavily, its meaning unmistakable. Aisha's heart thudded, not from fear, but from the weary anger of facing this script. Again, different faces, same assumptions. She tilted her head slightly, meeting Edward's stare. "I'm aware of its exclusivity," she said. "That's why I'm here to buy it." Edward's smile faltered just for a moment before he recovered. "Of course," he said, his tone indulgent, as if humoring a child. "But for such a significant purchase, we'd require verification, a card perhaps, or proof of funds." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We've had issues with certain individuals wasting our time." The implication was raw, unfiltered by pretense. Aisha, black and plainly dressed, was one of those people. The store seemed to shrink around her, the chandelier's glow turning harsh, the whispers sharpening into blades. "I don't carry cards when I'm dressed like this," Aisha said, gesturing to her tracksuit, her voice calm but laced with steel. "But I assure you I can pay." Edward's eyes flicked to Claire, a silent exchange passing between them, a look Aisha knew too well, one that dismissed her as a fraud before she could prove otherwise. A couple browsing nearby paused their conversation, stalling as they watched their expressions, a mix of curiosity and secondhand embarrassment. Aisha stood taller, her shoulders squared, refusing to let their judgment erode her purpose. "Then perhaps you'd like to return when you're better prepared," Edward suggested, his smile now a thin veneer over disdain. "We have other customers who require our attention." The dismissal was clear, a polite shove toward the door, but Aisha didn't budge. "I'm prepared now," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'd like to complete the purchase." Claire's hand froze on the counter, and Edward's smile vanished entirely, replaced by a flicker of irritation. The pen lay between them, a silent witness to the battle unfolding. One Aisha hadn't sought, but wouldn't flee. The chandelier's light and Lux Emporium cast jagged prisms across the marble floor, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Aisha Thompson stood firm before the counter, the rare fountain pen still resting on its velvet tray, its ebony vines glinting like a promise she refused to let slip away. Her navy tracksuit felt like armor, now each seam quiet defiance against the storm. Brewing around her, Edward Langston, the boutique's manager, loomed with his tailored suit and polished smile, his words, "We have other customers who require our attention," hanging in the air. Like a guillotine poised to fall, Claire, the saleswoman, stood at his side, her smirk barely concealed, feeding off Edward's authority. Aisha's pulse 3 knot from doubt, but from the raw, familiar sting of being judged for her skin, her clothes, her very presence. I'm prepared. Now Aisha repeated her voice, a blade slicing through the tension. I'd like to complete the purchase. The words were simple, deliberate, each one a stake driven into the ground. She refused to see Edward's eyes, narrowed his smile, dissolving into a thin line of irritation. He tilted his head as if reassessing a puzzle that refused to fit his assumptions, madam, he said, his tone now stripped of its earlier pretense. This is a $45, 000 pen. Surely you understand our need for caution. The word caution dripped with implication, a coded accusation that Aisha was not just out of place, but potentially dangerous. A threat to the boutique's pristine order. Aisha's jaw tightened, but her gaze remained steady, locking onto Edwards with an intensity that made him shift slightly. I understand, she said, her voice calm, but laced with an edge that cut through the room's hum. But I've told you I can pay. Why is that not? Too enough the question hung there, stark and unyielding, exposing the truth neither Edward nor Claire would name. It wasn't about money, it was about her blackness, her tracksuit, her refusal to perform wealth. In a way they recognized the air grew heavier, the outward perfume now clawing as if the store itself were conspiring to push her out. Claire stepped forward, emboldened by Edward's presence. It's policy, she said, her voice sharper, hands clasped tightly as restraining her disdain. We can't just let anyone handle our most exclusive items. Without verification, the word anyone landed like a slap, its meaning clear to everyone within earshot. Aisha felt the room tilt, the weight of a dozen eyes pressing into her customers, pausing mid-brows, their whispers growing bolder. A woman in a silk scarf clutched her purse tighter, her glance flickering between curiosity and judgment. A man in a pinstripe suit leaned toward his companion, murmuring something that drew a stifled laugh. Aisha stood alone in their spotlight, but she would not shrink policy. Aisha echoed her tone, measured, but carrying a challenge. Does your policy apply to every customer, or just those who don't look like they belong? The question was a spark tossed into dry grass, and for a moment silence gripped the store. Claire's cheeks flushed her, lips parting as if to retort. But Edward raised a hand, silencing her. His smile returned colder, now a calculated mask to regain control. We treat all customers with equal respect. He said the lie, smooth but brittle. But we've had incidents, people pretending to be something they're not. His eyes flicked over, Aisha's attire lingering on her sneakers, and the room seemed to nod in agreement with his unspoken verdict. Aisha's heart pounded not from fear, but from a fury she'd learned to temper long ago. She'd faced this script in countless forms. Security guards trailing her in stores, waiters questioning her reservations, and colleagues assuming she was the assistant, not the lead, each time she'd risen above. But today the rawness of it burned. She was here for David, for a gift that carried her love, and they dared to reduce her to a caricature. I'm not pretending, she said, her voice low, but resonant, filling the space like to a tide. I'm here to buy that pen. If you have a problem with that, it's yours, not mine. Edward's composure wavered, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He stepped closer, invading the invisible boundary of her space. His height and suit meant to intimidate. I'm afraid it's not that simple, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper as if shielding their exchange from the gawking crowd. Without verification, a card, a bank statement, something we can't proceed, you understand. Don't you? The condescension was suffocating, his words wrapped in a veneer of civility that only deepened the insult. Aisha felt the heat rising in her chest, but she held her ground. Her shoulders squared, her gaze unyielding. I understand perfectly, she said, each word clipped and precise. "You're assuming I can't afford it because of how I look, because I'm black." The accusation landed like thunder. Stripping away the boutique's polished pretense, Claire gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. While Edward's eyes widened a flicker of panic betraying his control, the customers froze, their whispers dying, as the room became a stage for Aisha's defiance. She hadn't wanted this confrontation. She'd come for a pen, not a crusade, but their refusal to see her forced her hand. Edward recovered quickly, his smile snapping back into place, though it trembled at the edges. "That's a serious claim," he said, his voice now laced with a warning. "We don't discriminate, but we do protect our business. If you can't provide what we need, I'll have to ask you to step aside." The threat was clear, a polite shove toward the exit, but Aisha didn't move. Her eyes flicked to the pen, its vines now seeming to writhe under the full light, a symbol of everything. She refused to surrender. "I'm not stepping anywhere," she said. "I'm a customer and I'm here to buy." The store seemed to hold its breath, the tension coiling tighter with each second Claire shifted. Nervously, her earlier bravado crumbling under Aisha's resolve, the couple by the jewelry case exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable, while a young woman in a velvet dress stared openly, her phone half raised, as if debating whether to record Edward's patience frayed, visibly his hands clenching behind his back. "This is becoming disruptive," he said, to his voice hardening. "We have a reputation to maintain, and I won't let it be compromised." The word reputation was a weapon wielded to cast Aisha as the intruder, the blemish on their perfect canvas. Aisha's fingers curled slightly, the only sign of the storm within her. She thought of David, of the lunch they'd share, of the pen that would make him smile. She thought of every time she'd swallowed her anger to keep the peace, and how today that peace felt like surrender your reputation, she said, her voice steady, despite the fire in her chest, is built on treating people like this, judging them before they speak. Edward's face darkened his control, slipping as her words struck home. He opened his mouth to respond, but Aisha, that wasn't done. "I'm not the one disrupting anything," she said. "You are the standoff." Stretched, taut, and electric, as if the room itself awaited. The breaking point. Edward's eyes darted to Claire, then back to Aisha, calculating his next move. The pen lay between them, a silent witness to the battle for dignity. And Aisha knew whatever came next, she would not be the one to yield. The silence in Lux Emporium was a living thing coiling around Aisha Thompson like a serpent tightening with every heartbeat. Her words, "I'm not the one disrupting anything. You are," hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown at Edward Langston's feet. The manager's face, once a mask of polished control, now betrayed a flicker of rage, his eyes glinting like polished steel under the chandelier's harsh glow. The fountain pen, its ebony vines frozen on the velvet tray, seemed to pulse between them, a silent emblem of Aisha's resolve. She stood unwavering in her navy tracksuit, her braids catching the light, her brown skin a quiet defiance against the boutique's sterile opulence. Claire, the saleswoman, shrank back her earlier smirk replaced by unease, her hands fidgeting as the room's attention bore down. Edward's lips twitched a smile that was more snarl than civility enough. He said, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the whispers that had begun to ripple among the customers. "You've made your point, madam, but this is a place of business, not a stage for accusations." His words were a dismissal, then a command to vanish. But Aisha's feet remained rooted to the marble floor. The heart pounded, not from fear, but from the clarity of her purpose she'd come for. David's gift for love, and no amount of prejudice would steal that from her. "I'm a customer," she said, her voice steady, resonant. "I've asked to buy that pen. Why is that a problem?" The question was a spark in a powder keg. and Edward's composure cracked. He stepped closer, his tailored suit looming his presence, meant to intimidate the problem, he said. His voice now, a hiss, is that you're wasting our time. You claim you can pay, but you've shown nothing. No card, no proof, nothing to suggest you belong here. His eyes ran over her tracksuit, lingered on her skin, and the unspoken truth burned. It wasn't her lack of evidence, but her blackness that marked her as unworthy. Aisha felt the sting raw and familiar, but she lifted her chin, refusing to let it burrow into her soul around them. The store had become a theater of judgment. A woman in a velvet dress clutched her pearls, her gaze darting between Aisha and Edward as if watching a duel. A man in a cashmere coat whispered to his companion, their laughter stifled but cruel. Claire's hands trembled slightly, her loyalty to Edward wearing with the unease creeping into her posture. Aisha stood alone, the weight of their stares pressing into her, but she would not bend. I don't need to prove myself to you, she said, her voice rising, just enough to carry. I've told you, I can pay. If you refuse me, that's your choice, not mine. Edward's face darkened, his patience unraveling like a frayed thread. This isn't a negotiation, he snapped, abandoning all pretense of courtesy. That you're disrupting our environment, and I won't tolerate it. He gestured toward the door, his hand slicing through the air like a verdict. Leave. Now the command was a blade, meant to sever her dignity, and the room seemed to lean in, hungry for her surrender. Claire nodded faintly, emboldened by Edward's resolve, while the customers' whispers grew bolder, their judgment a chorus of complicity. Aisha's breath caught the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. The thought of David, of the pen's delicate vines, of the love she'd come to honor. She thought of every time she'd walked away from slights like this, choosing peace over confrontation, but today peace felt like defeat. I'm not leaving, she said, her voice a quiet thunder. Not until you treat me like any other customer. The defiance was electric, a current that jolted the room. Edward's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face as if no one had ever dared to challenge him so directly. That's it, he said, his voice now a growl. He stepped forward, closing the firm distance between them, his hand hovering near her arm as if debating whether to touch her. You're done here. People like you don't shop at Lux Emporium. The phrase people like you was a whip, its racial sting unmistakable, and Aisha felt it crack across her skin. The store fell silent, the customers' whispers dying, their faces a mix of shock and morbid fascination. Claire's mouth opened, then closed, and her role as accomplice cemented. Aisha stood taller, her shoulders squared, her gaze locked on Edward's. People like me, she echoed, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. You don't know me. Edward's hand moved a subtle gesture toward the door, but it carried the weight of finality. Out, he said, his tone cold, unyielding. Or I'll have security remove. That you, the threat, was a hammer meant to crush her resolve, and Aisha felt the room's eyes boring into her, waiting for her to break. She glanced at the pen, its vines now seeming to writhe with accusation, and her heart twisted not for herself but for the gift she might lose. With a deep breath, she made her choice. You're making a mistake, she said, quietly, her words not a plea but a warning. She turned her sneakers silent on the marble and walked toward the door, Edward trailing her like a shadow. As they reached the entrance, he leaned close, his voice a venomous whisper. Try a thrift store. Next time, the insult was a final barb, meant to bury her, and the glass door swung open with a soft chime that felt like a funeral bell. Aisha stepped onto Rodeo Drive, the Cap 2's California sun blinding after the boutique's chill. The door closed behind her, Edward's silhouette lingering. Through the glass, he smirked a fleeting ghost. It was 10:45 a.m. and the street buzzed with oblivious life, shoppers, cars, the clatter of wealth. But Aisha felt exposed as if the sun itself had turned against her. She took a shaky breath, steadying herself against the wave of humiliation. Her fingers curled her nails, biting into her palms, but her head remained high. She'd faced worse. Boardroom slights, whispered assumptions. But this was raw public, a spectacle designed to diminish her, checking her. Watch. She noted David's arrival in an hour. Part of her wanted to wait to let him storm in and right this wrong, but that would ruin the Penn's surprise. Besides, she'd never needed him to fight her battles. She glanced back at the boutique Edward, now laughing with Claire, their mockery, a distant pantomime. Through the window, Aisha's resolve hardened an ember, glowing in her chest. She walked down the block, each step a reclamation of her dignity. The pen was still hers to give, and no one, not Edward, not Claire, not the staring crowd, would take that from her. Rodeo drive stretched before her, glittering but hollow, and Aisha knew this wasn't the end. The storm she'd left behind was only gathering strength, and when it broke, Lux Emporium would feel its weight. The sun bore down on Rodeo Drive, its relentless glare turning the sidewalk into a mirror that reflected Aisha Thompson's solitary figure. Her navy tracksuit clung to her, suddenly heavy, as if soaked with the weight of what had just transpired inside Lux Emporium. The boutique's glass door now, a barrier behind her, sealed off the chill of Edward Langston's venom and Claire's sneers. But their echoes lingered. People like, "You don't shop here. Try a thrift store." Aisha's breath hitched her chest tight with a fury she refused to let spill. At 10:45 a.m. the street hummed with oblivious life, shoppers gliding past with the glossy bags, cars purring in slow procession. But to Aisha it felt like a stage where she'd been cast as the outcast. Her dignity, the price of their script. She walked, her sneakers soft against the pavement, each step a deliberate act of reclaiming herself. Braids swayed, catching the light, and her brown skin glowed. Despite the ache beneath it, she'd faced prejudice before. Subtle jabs at Gayla's pointed questions about her place beside David. But this was a public stripping, a spectacle meant to erase her. Her fingers curled, nails biting into her palms, but her head stayed high. Her gaze fixed forward, the fountain, pen its ebony vines etched in. Her mind was still her mission. A gift for David that no one would steal yet. The humiliation burned coal, lodged in her throat, and she fought the urge to turn back to demand the respect she deserved. Aisha paused at a corner, the clatter of Rodeo Drive fading into a dull roar. She checked her watch. David would arrive in less than an hour, his black SUV pulling up for their lunch. The thought of his steady presence, his quiet strength, brought a flicker of warmth, but she pushed it aside. Telling him now would ruin the Penn's surprise. And worse, it would mean admitting she'd let Edward win. She wouldn't. Not today. Her eyes scanned the street, searching for clarity, when a voice broke through her storm. "Excuse me." A woman said, her tone gentle, but firm, like a hand extended in the dark. Aisha turned to see a middle-aged woman approaching, her auburn hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat, a small shopping bag dangling from her wrist. Her eyes, hazel and unguarded, held a kindness that felt foreign after the boutique's cruelty. I was in there. The woman continued, nodding toward Lux Emporium. "I saw what happened. The way they treated you. It was wrong. They judged you for your skin. And I'm so sorry." Aisha blinked, the words piercing her armor, not with pain, but with something softer, unexpected. She studied the woman's face, searching for pity or pretense, but found only sincerity. "Thank you," Aisha said, her voice quieter than she had intended, the cold in her throat loosening slightly. "I'm okay." Just disappointed, the word. Felt inadequate, a pale shadow of the anger, and hurt, churning within, but she couldn't bring herself to say more, not yet. The woman shook her head, her lips pressing into a thin line. Disappointed doesn't cover it, that manager, Edward. He was awful, and the saleswoman acting like you didn't belong. It wasn't right. She hesitated, then added, "You carried yourself with such grace. I don't know if I could have done that." Aisha managed a small smile, the gesture unfamiliar after the morning's blows. "You do what you have to," she said, her voice steadier. "Now, I have had practice." The woman nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "Still, it shouldn't happen, not here, not anywhere." She glanced at her bag, then back at Aisha as if weighing whether to say more. "I hope you get that pen. It looked important to you." Aisha's smile deepened, a spark of warmth reigniting it. As she said, "It's for someone special," the woman's face softened, and she stepped back, her driver now visible gesturing toward a waiting car. "Take care," she said, her voice lingering like a promise. "And don't let them dim you," with a final nod. She walked away, her hat bobbing in the crowd. Aisha watched her go the encounter. A lifeline she hadn't expected. The stranger's words, simple, unguarded, eased the weight on her chest, reminding her that not everyone saw her as Edward did. She straightened her resolve, hardening like steel forged in fire. The pen was still hers to claim, and she wouldn't let bigotry rewrite her story. She resumed, walking her steps. Firmer now, the streets glitter, no longer mocking but irrelevant. Rodeo. Drive could keep its judgment. She was more than its measure. Meanwhile, across the city, David Thompson navigated a different battlefield. His morning had been a gauntlet of meetings, investors, pitching ventures, analysts dissecting trends. But his mind kept drifting to Aisha, to their lunch, to the quiet moments that anchored his chaotic world. At 46, with close-cropped hair and a bespoke charcoal suit, he carried the Denise's weight of a tech empire with ease. But it was Aisha's presence that grounded him. Now, as his driver wove through traffic toward Rodeo Drive, David adjusted his cufflinks, unaware of the storm awaiting him back on the sidewalk. Aisha's thoughts churned. She could return to Lux Emporium, demand the pen, but the memory of Edward's sneer, "People like you," stopped her. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her beg. Instead, she kept moving the sun, climbing higher. Its heat, a mirror to the ember in her chest. She glanced at her watch, 11 a.m. David's arrival loomed, and with it, in the choice to tell him or protect the surprise. Her heart tugged both ways, but her pride held firm. This was her fight, and she'd face it on her terms. A block away, a man in a baseball cap watched the street, his eyes sharp. Despite his casual stance, he'd been in the boutique earlier, a silent observer among the crowd, and what he'd seen had stirred something in him now. As David's SUV neared, he straightened his gaze, flicking toward Aisha's retreating figure. Fate was aligning, and he sensed it, a collision of justice and reckoning that would shake Lux Emporium's polished walls. Aisha didn't see him, didn't know the ripples her stand had already set in motion, but she felt a shift, a whisper of strength that urged her forward. The street stretched before her, glittering but hollow, and Aisha walked on her head high, her purpose unbroken. The pen was more than a gift. Now it was a symbol of her worth, and no one, not Edward, not Claire, not the staring world, would take that from her. The morning wasn't over, and neither was her story. Somewhere in the distance, the hum of a black SUV grew closer, carrying a man who would turn her pain into power. But for now, Aisha was enough. Her grace, her fire, her unyielding heart. Rodeo Drive shimmered under the midday sun, its sidewalks a stage where wealth strutted and whispers danced. At 11:50 a.m., Aisha Thompson walked back toward Lux Emporium, Her navy tracksuit a quiet rebellion against the street's glitz. Her braids swayed her brown skin, catching the light, but her eyes held a storm fueled by the memory of Edward Langston's sneer and Claire's disdain. The stranger's kindness had steadied her, but the ember of defiance in her chest burned brighter, now urging her forward. She'd protect the fountain pen's surprise for David, but she wouldn't let the boutique's cruelty define her. Mourning each step was a reclaiming her dignity, a shield forged in fire, a block away. A black SUV glided to the curb, its tinted windows swallowing the sun's glare. David Thompson stepped out, his charcoal suit tailored to his broad frame. His close-cropped hair flecked with early gray at 46, he carried the 5555 weight of a tech empire, with the ease of a man who'd built it brick by brick. But today his jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the street for Aisha. His morning meetings deals the endless churn of power had faded the moment he thought of their lunch. Her smile, his anchor, he adjusted his cufflinks, expecting to find her browsing unaware of the battle she'd fought as David reached for Lux Emporium's door. A man in a baseball cap stepped forward, his face weathered. "But earnest you David Thompson?" he asked, voice low. David nodded his instincts. "Sharpening your wife was kicked out of that store," the man said, pointing to the boutique. "They treated her like dirt because she's black. Thought you should know." The words hit like a fist. David's expression darkening, his hand freezing on the handle. Fury flared, controlled but molten, a force honed by years of protecting what mattered most. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low growl. "Which way did she go?" The man gestured down the street. "That way, she's strong." But they were cruel. David's eyes followed the direction, landing on Aisha as she approached, her posture unbowed, but her face carrying a shadow he knew too well. Their gazes met across the distance, and her steps quickened, a flicker of relief softening her features. She reached him just as he turned from the door, her hand brushing his arm. "Rough morning?" she asked, her voice light but strained the mask to shield the truth. David studied her, reading the hurt she tried to hide. "Someone told me what happened," he said, his tone steady but laced with steel. "It's not okay, Aisha." She sighed, her shoulders easing slightly. "It's just people being people. Let's not ruin our day." But David's gaze didn't waver, his hand closing gently over hers. "No one treats you like that," he said, each word a vow. "Not here, not anywhere." Aisha opened her mouth to protest, but the fire in his eyes stopped her. She knew that look, the controlled intensity that silenced boardrooms, the resolve that had built their life together. He was already moving his hand on the door, purpose in every line of his body. Aisha followed her, heart torn between shielding the surprise and trusting the storm he'd unleash inside Lux Emporium. The air was thick with the hum of wealth chandeliers casting their cold glow-out perfume. Clinging to the senses, Edward stood by a display regaling Claire and the junior staffer with his triumph over that woman who thought she could fool us. His laugh was sharp, a blade honed by arrogance, and Claire's smirk mirrored their voices, a private mockery, dressed like she came from a gym. Edward scoffed, demanding our Montclair penned the nerve. Their laughter spilled across the marble, oblivious to the shadow crossing the threshold. The door's chime cut through their mirth, a single note that froze the room. David entered, Aisha at his side, and the boutique seemed to shrink under his presence. His suit spoke of power, his stride of certainty, but it was his eyes, dark, unyielding, that commanded silence. Customers paused, sensing a shift. A woman in a fur stole lowered her phone, her gossip forgotten. Edward's laugh died mid-breath, his face paling as he registered David's gaze. Then Aisha's tracksuit behind him. Claire's smirk vanished, her hands twitching as connection sparked in her mind. Edward hurried forward, his smile snapping into plays a fragile mask over dawning dread. "Good afternoon, sir," he said, his voice overly bright. "Welcome to Lux Emporium. How may we assist you?" The words were rehearsed, but they trembled under David's scrutiny like leaves before a gale. David stopped, his presence filling the space. And when he spoke, his voice was a blade. "Calm, precise, lethal. "You threw my wife out of your store," he said. Each word measured but heavy with accusation. "Judged her for her skin. Assumed she was poor. Insulted her." The air turned to glass, brittle and ready to shatter. Edward's mouth opened, then closed, his eyes darting to Aisha, who stood with quiet strength, her gaze steady but unreadable. Claire gasped, a soft sound swallowed by the silence, her two hands gripping the counter as if to anchor herself. Customers froze, their browsing abandoned, drawn into the drama unfolding before them. Edward's smile crumbled, his arrogance unraveling like a thread. "Mr. Thompson, he stammered, but David raised a hand, silencing him with a gesture that carried the weight of empires. "There's no misunderstanding," David said, his voice low but resonant, filling the room like thunder rolling in. "You saw her clothes, her skin, and decided she didn't belong. You didn't just disrespect my wife, you disrespected everyone you've ever judged." Like that, his words were a reckoning, stripping away the boutique's veneer and exposing the rot beneath its polish. Aisha's heart thudded, not from fear, but from the power of his stand. A love that fought not just for her, but for justice itself. Edward swayed slightly, his polished facade cracking under David's gaze. Claire stared at the floor, her bravado gone, her role as accomplice now a burden. The junior staffer backed away, eyes wide as if sensing the storm's full force. Customers whispered their shock, a quiet chorus, but David's focus never wavered. He turned to Aisha, his expression softening for a moment. "Is this the pen?" he asked, his voice warm, a lifeline in the chaos. She nodded, pointing to the Montclair, its vines gleaming on the velvet tray. "Beautiful choice," he said, a smile flickering, before his gaze returned to Edward, cold as stone. The boutique held its breath. The tension, a wire stretched to breaking Edward's hands, trembled, his authority dissolving, and Aisha knew whatever came next. The storm had arrived and nothing would be the same. The air in Lux Emporium crackled as if the chandeliers above had drawn lightning from the storm. David Thompson unleashed his words. "You didn't just disrespect my wife, you disrespected everyone you've ever judged." Like that hung like a verdict, stripping the boutique's polished veneer to bear its flaws. Aisha Thompson stood beside him, her navy tracksuit, quiet defiance, her braids catching the light as her brown eyes held steady, unyielding. Edward Langston, the manager, faltered under David's gaze, his tailored suit no shield against the truth. Now, laid bare. Claire, the saleswoman, gripped the counter, her earlier smirk buried beneath a rising tide of panic. The fountain pen, its ebony vines gleaming on the velvet tray, seemed to watch, a silent witness to the reckoning unfolding at Sir E. 55A M on Rodeo Drive. David's presence filled the room, his charcoal suit, a stark contrast to the boutique's glittering excess, his voice, a thunder that silenced even the whispers of onlookers. Customers stood, frozen, their designer bags forgotten, drawn into the drama as if it were a play they'd paid to see. A woman in a silk scarf clutched her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen, while a man in a velvet blazer stared, his curiosity tinged with unease. The junior staffer lingered at the edge, eyes darting as if seeking the escape from the weight of complicity. Aisha felt their gazes, but kept her focus on David, her heart swelling with a deep peace, mix of gratitude and resolve. This wasn't just her fight now, it was theirs, a stand, For dignity that echoed beyond the boutique's walls, Edward stammered his voice, afraid. "Thread, Mr. Thompson. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." The words were desperate. A plea to rewrite the narrative, but David's raised hand stopped him cold. A gesture that carried the authority of a man who'd built empires. "No misunderstanding," David said, his tone low, but unyielding, each syllable a stone in a growing wall. "You saw her clothes, her skin, and made a choice. You chose wrong." His eyes locked onto Edward's, unflinching, and the manager's face drained of color, his arrogance crumbling like ash clares. Breath hitched, her hands trembling as she avoided Aisha's gaze, her role as accomplice now, a noose tightening around. Her David turned to Aisha, his expression softening, a flicker of warmth breaking through the storm. "Is this the pen?" he asked, his voice gentle. A reminder of the love that had brought her here. She nodded, pointing to the Montlaire, its intricate vines, catching the light like a story, waiting to be told. "Beautiful choice," he said, his smile, brief but genuine, a moment of connection that grounded her amidst the chaos. Then his gaze returned to Edward, cold and precise, a blade honed for justice. "I want to speak to your owner," he said, the demand slicing through the boutique's hush. Like a guillotine, Edward swallowed his Adam's apple, bobbing as sweat beaded on his brow. "Mr. Carver is in Paris." He managed his voice thin, clinging to the last scraps of authority. "I'm the manager, fully authorized to—" David cut him off, his voice a quiet thunder that needed no volume to command. "Then you're authorized to explain why your store's lease is at risk." The words landed like a quake, and Aisha's breath, caught not from surprise, but from the weight of David's power, unveiled. His tech conglomerate held stakes in half of Rodeo Drive's properties, including the building beneath their feet, a ice fact Edward clearly hadn't known. The manager's eyes wide in panic, flickering as the ground shifted beneath him. "Lease, Edward," echoed his voice, barely a whisper, his hands twitching as if grasping for control. David's expression didn't waver, his calm, a storm's eye that promised no mercy. "You didn't just insult my wife," he said. "You insulted every person who walks through that door and faces your judgment that ends today." The room seemed to shrink, the chandelier's glow turning harsh, illuminating Edward's unraveling. Claire stared at the floor, her knuckles white against the counter, while the junior staffer backed further away as if distance could absolve her silence. David's voice softened, but its edge remained. "Apologize to my wife," he said, each word deliberate. "Not because she's my wife, but because she's a human being who deserves respect." The command was a lifeline, and a sentence offering Edward a chance to salvage something if he could swallow his pride. Aisha's heart thudded, not from the apology she knew would come, but from David's clarity. This wasn't about their status, but about right and wrong. She stood taller, her tracksuit no longer a mark of shame, but a badge of her authenticity. Edward turned to her, his face a mask of humiliation, his eyes avoiding hers as he spoke. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice trembling, "I'm deeply sorry for my behavior. It was inexcusable." The words were stilted, forced, but they carried the weight of his defeat. Aisha nodded, her expression unreadable, granting him no absolution but acknowledging the moment. That customers stirred their whispers, resuming a mix of shock and fascination at the power shift. Claire's head bowed, lower her role in the cruelty, now a shadow she couldn't escape. David's gaze returned to Edward, unrelenting. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice a quiet promise of consequences yet to come. "You've built a reputation on exclusion, but reputations fall." He reached into his jacket, producing a business card with deliberate care, its edges sharp against the light. "My team will contact you about your position," he said, handing it to Edward, whose fingers shook As he took it, did I mention? David added his tone, almost conversational, but laced with steel. We acquired Carver Retail Group last week. Your store answers to me now. A collective gasp rippled through the forens. Boutique. The sound like air escaping a punctured balloon. Edward swayed, steadying himself against the counter, his world collapsing under the weight of David's revelation. Claire's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror, while the junior staffer froze her retreat. Halted by the truth, customers exchanged glances, their phones now out capturing the moment for the world beyond. Aisha's breath steadied, not from surprise. She knew David's reach, but from the justice unfolding a tide. She hadn't sought, but wouldn't stop. David's voice cut through the shock. This isn't about punishment, he said, his gaze sweeping the room, addressing not just Edward, but everyone who'd watched in silence. It's about change. You'll learn that, or you'll leave. He turned to Aisha, his eyes softening again, a silent question passing between them. She nodded, understanding his intent. Not vengeance, but a reckoning that would ripple outward. The pen, still on its tray, seemed to gleam brighter, a symbol not just of love, but of triumph over prejudice. The boutique held its breath, the tension a wire stretched to snapping. Edward clutched the card, his future now in David's hands, and Aisha knew the scent. The truth was unveiled, and with it, the power to reshape what Lux Emporium could become. The chandelier's glow in Lux Emporium flickered as if struggling to illuminate the seismic shift unfolding below. David Thompson's revelation, your store answers to me now, hung in the air like to a thunderclap, its echoes dismantling the boutique's polished arrogance. Aisha Thompson stood at his side, her navy tracksuit, a quiet testament to her resilience, her braids catching the light. As her brown eyes held a steady, calm Edward, Langston clutched David's business card, his tailored suit. No longer a shield, but a shroud, his face ashen under the weight of his unraveling world. Claire, the saleswoman, stood frozen behind the counter, her hands trembling, her earlier disdain buried beneath a dawning horror. The fountain pen, its ebony vines gleaming on the velvet tray, seemed to pulse with the moment's gravity, a symbol of love and now of justice. At 11:58 a.m. on Rodeo Drive, the boutique was a tableau of shock, customers gripping their bags, their whispers silenced by the drama's intensity. A woman in a velvet dress stared her phone, forgotten. A man in a pinstriped suit leaned forward as if drawn into a story too potent to ignore. The junior staffer hovered near display, her eyes wide, her silence a confession of complicity. Aisha felt their gazes, but stood taller, her heart thrumming with a quiet pride, not for David's power, but for the stand they'd taken together. This wasn't just about her humiliation, it was about every person who'd been judged, diminished, and cast out for daring to exist in spaces like this. David's voice broke the stillness, calm but unyielding, a river, carving stone. Firing you would be easy, he said to Edward, his eyes never leaving the manager's. Too easy. The words were a promise, not of mercy, but of something harder. Change. Edward's shoulders slumped, card in his hand trembling, as if it burned instead. David continued, Lux Emporium will launch a diversity and inclusion program, mandatory for every employee, training on bias, respect, equity. Starting next month. He paused, letting the weight settle his gaze, sweeping the haze. Room to include Claire, the staffer, and the onlookers. My wife will consult on its development. Aisha's breath caught, her eyes flicking to David in surprise. He hadn't mentioned this, hadn't asked, but the gesture was pure. David turning pain into purpose, her strength into a legacy. She understood instantly. This wasn't punishment, but progress, a chance to reshape the boutique's soul. She nodded a silent agreement, her resolve. Deepening, Edward's eyes darted to her, a flicker of fear replacing his earlier arrogance. As if realizing she held more power than he'd ever imagined, Claire's head bowed, lower her knuckles, white, against the counter. Her role in Aisha's ejection now, a chain she couldn't shed. David's tone sharpened, addressing Edward directly. Your alternative is resignation. Choose now. The ultimatum was a blade clean, final, and unforgiving. The boutique seemed to lean in, every crystal light glinting in anticipation, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Edward's lips parted, yet no sound came. Pride and survival warred within him, and the moment stretched longer than humanly comfortable. Customers paused mid-step, the faint rustle of designer handbags and polished shoes fading into silence. The junior staffer shifted, her discomfort radiating outward in tiny, nervous gestures, an unsteady hand brushing the counter, a heel dragging across marble. Aisha observed with a clarity that felt almost surgical. Her eyes were calm, steady, absorbing everything. Edward's hesitation, the subtle tension in the staff, the barely suppressed fascination of the patrons. She didn't need Edward to crumble spectacularly. She needed accountability. She needed the lesson to land. Finally, Edward's voice broke the stillness, cracked and hesitant. I'll participate in the training. Sire. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. Every ounce of dignity seemed stripped away in that moment. Yet, it was enough. David's eyes, sharp and unflinching, met his. Good. Training begins next week. Don't test my patience. He checked his watch with deliberate precision, a reminder that time had become Edward's enemy, that every second now was a measure of the authority he had lost. Then David issued a command so simple, it was seismic. Process my wife's purchase. We have a lunch to get to. Edward's hands trembled, indecision flashing across his features. Before he moved toward the counter, the air around him felt thinner, his authority reduced to mechanical obedience. Claire, who had observed the scene in quiet complicity, stepped back, her face pale, as if proximity to Edward might taint her with the aura of defeat. The junior staffer adjusted a display, trying desperately to disappear into the background. Aisha's gaze stayed fixed on Edward as he retrieved the Montler pen. Its vines shimmered under the boutique lights, each twist and curl catching a sliver of brilliance, almost alive, as if it knew the story it was about to witness. Edward's hands, the same hands that had once ushered Aisha out with disdain, now moved carefully, reverently. He placed the pen in a sleek black box, lined with soft tissue, and wrapped it with a gold ribbon. Each motion spoke in silence, a private apology, a subtle acknowledgement of his earlier arrogance. Aisha's heart remained steady. The humiliation she had endured, the sharp sting of exclusion, began to fade, eclipsed by the gravity of the present. The pen was hers, not only a gift for David, but a symbol of refusal, of standing tall. In a world that often tried to diminish her, Claire remained silent, a mere witness. Now, her previous authority, irrelevant. The boutique staff moved quietly, intent on avoiding notice, leaving the room's focus entirely on the transaction and the unspoken tension it carried. David slid his card across the counter. The soft beep of the machine seemed almost ceremonial, a punctuation mark, signaling the end of Edward's tyranny, a small triumph, carved out in gold and black. Aisha lifted the wrapped box, feeling its weight, light but profound. Her eyes met David's across the counter, and a silent flicker of pride passed between them. Love needed no words here. The customers, once spectators, resumed their whispers. But now the tone had shifted, from curiosity tinged with judgment to admiration laced with awe. A woman in a fur stole nodded faintly, as if acknowledging Aisha's grace and composure. A man lowered his phone, the smirk disappearing from his face. Lux Emporium was no longer a battlefield. It had transformed into a classroom, and the first lesson had been delivered in silence and dignity. As Aisha and David turned toward the door, Edward's voice trembled through the quiet. "Mr. Thompson." Eye blanks. David raised a hand. A gesture, both commanding and final. "Save it. You'll prove your regret with actions, not words." It was a lock clicking shut. Edward sagged, utterly defeated. Aisha's footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor as she walked beside David. The glass doors loomed ahead, their chimes waiting, but she felt no rush. She had come here for love, and she was leaving with justice. The California sun spilled over Rodeo Drive in relentless gold, washing the boutique's threshold with warmth. Aisha clutched the box tightly. The ribbon glinted, catching the light like a spark, promising more than just a purchase. Every step she took radiated quiet triumph. The boutique behind her no longer held power over her, its whispers, its sneers. The subtle hierarchies of judgment all faded into a distant memory. The pen was hers, the moral victory, hers, and with David by her side, the fire it sparked would burn long after they left the boutique. Rodeo Drive buzzed, with its usual rhythm, polished cars, idling chauffeur, shoppers gliding past with glossy bags. No one noticed the seismic shift that had just occurred, but Aisha did. She felt the ripples, a subtle hum of possibility spreading outward. The quiet knowledge that justice had taken shape not through revenge, but through dignity, accountability, and unwavering grace. Aisha drew a deep breath, heart steady. The storm had passed, yet its impact lingered like a promise. Today, she had walked in for love and walked out with justice, and in her hands, the pen glimmered, ready to light the next chapter of the story. The sun hung high over Rodeo Drive, bathing the street in relentless gold. Shoppers drifted along, their laughter and chatter blending, with the soft purr of engines and the gentle click of designer heels. To anyone else, it was a typical afternoon of wealth and display. To Aisha, every step radiated a quiet victory. The boutique behind her, Lux Emporium, had lost its grip, its power muted by dignity and accountability. She held the Montler pen tightly, its gold ribbon catching the sunlight like a promise. It was more than an object, it was a spark, the embodiment of the morning's triumph. David walked beside her, the steady weight of his presence, a comforting anchor. His hand brushed hers from time to time, small gestures that spoke volumes without words. Every step they took together felt synchronized, a partnership forged through challenge and strengthened by respect and love. Aisha drew in a deep breath, letting the warmth of the California sun fill her, washing away the tension that had clung to her like shadow for hours. They approached their favorite lunch spot, a quiet bistro tucked just off the main strip. Its ivy-covered patio promised respite from the street's relentless glare. Aisha's steps slowed. She let the weight of the box steady her. David's eyes softened as he observed her, the familiar spark of pride and affection lighting his face. "You didn't have to clear your afternoon," she said lightly, teasing, her voice threading through the morning's heaviness. David's lips curved into a small, knowing smile, and missed seeing Edward squirm. "Never." Aisha laughed, bright and unburdened. The sound a release, a shedding of the boutique's shadows. Even from afar, their laughter seemed to draw quiet attention, curious glances from other diners, whispers of admiration, respect, barely restrained. For the first time that morning, Aisha allowed herself the comfort of pure joy. She had not only stood her ground, she had done so with grace, and the world had acknowledged it. They settled at a corner table beneath the ivy, dappled sunlight flickering across the smooth surface. A young server greeted them with a warm smile. Unaware of the drama they had just emerged from, Aisha placed the box beside David's plate, letting the ribbon glint in the sun. As though marking its sacredness, David raised an eyebrow, curiosity sparking. But Aisha shook her head with playful secrecy. "Not yet," she said, savoring the moment a little longer. Their meal unfolded in the soft rhythm of normalcy. Grilled salmon for Aisha, a perfectly cooked steak for David, a shared bottle of sparkling water. Between bites, they spoke of trivial things. The latest book Aisha was reading, a new project David was considering, the way their garden bloomed at home. Each topic was mundane, yet layered beneath it was the morning's weight. A quiet acknowledgement that life had shifted irreversibly. "You were incredible in there," David said, voice low, meant only for her. "The way you stood your ground. I'm proud of you." Aisha felt her throat tighten, not from sadness, but from the depth of the words. She had fought alone at first, and then with David beside her, transforming her stand into a shared force. No prejudice could shake. "I'm proud of us," she replied, steady, her eyes locking with his. "We didn't just win. We made it mean something." Time seemed to slow around them. The box, still between them, waited patiently. Finally, David gave in to curiosity. With a boyish grin surfacing, he untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. His breath caught, eyes widening as he took in the Monler pen. The vines shimmered under his touch, alive with detail, elegant and perfect. "Aisha," he murmured, turning it in his hands. "It's perfect." She leaned closer, her voice soft, yet certain. "It's more than that. It's ours." The simple words, spoken in the golden light, felt monumental. Outside, Rodeo Drive carried on obliviously, but inside their corner of the world, a quiet beacon had been lit. Their stand, at Lux Emporium, the lessons of dignity and accountability, would ripple outward. Whispers of their story would pass from boutique to boutique, across social feeds, into the city's pulse. Lux Emporium would either change or fall, but the mark of their victory, justice, tempered with grace, would endure. Aisha inhaled deeply, letting the warmth and sunlight anchor her. The storm had left its traces, but she had carried it through, emerging whole, unbroken. The pen, now David's, as much as hers, symbolized more than triumph. It was a spark, the potential to ignite more change, a reminder that standing for right need not require vengeance, only integrity. They finished their meal slowly, letting the world linger around them. Aisha felt a lightness she hadn't known since morning, a release, a calm after the storm. With each step back onto the street, hand in hand with David, the rhythm of life resumed, richer and softer than before. Rodeo Drive glimmered in the afternoon light. The polished cars, idling chauffeur, and glossy shopping bags, creating a glittering frame around them. Whispers of their victory had already begun. Subtle acknowledgments in glances, nods, and quiet conversations. But Aisha felt no need for recognition. Her triumph was private, luminous, rooted in integrity and love. And as they walked toward the horizon of possibility, the Montler pen gleaming between them, Aisha knew the fire it carried would burn long after the gold of Rodeo Drive faded into dusk, a quiet, enduring reminder that true wealth lies not in luxury, but in courage, compassion, and the steadfast refusal to be diminished